Took a few days to cure. I popped it out of the mold. And I've been working on it, getting ready for a flood coat. This is going to be a little end table. To 100 grit. Some water here. Let it dry and then do a flood coat on it today. So it may take, a couple hours to get all this done, but I figured I'd throw it up on the live feed. Kind of get a sense of what it'll look like with the flood coat on there. I sanded the bottom. There's a white epoxy on the very bottom. I sanded this to 80 grit random with a 3mm sander. You can kind of see the sanding strokes. Let me see if I can get it closer. You can see the sanding strokes left behind by the random sander. So we're going to get those out. And this 100 grit wet sponge will get out those 80 grit marks, because these marks here, if I did the flood coat over that, it would hide them pretty good, but you would still be able to see them a little bit. So doing it to 100 grit, it's not much difference, but using by hand sanding, it will be good enough for the tabletop epoxy. There's some more there to adhere to it, and the 100 grit wet sand marks won't be visible once we put the flood coat on it. And this is, like I said, this is a deep pour resin. We're going to be doing a tabletop resin on it. Now the deep pour resin, the viscosity on that is much lower. You can get away with sanding it to much rougher grit, like 60 grit. But most deep pour resins, in fact, I haven't used a deep pour resin yet that has a nice crystal clear finish, smooth finish on the top. But tabletop epoxy, and I use, epoxy and resin interchangeable. Tabletop, every single time with all brands, will leave a nice clear, polished look without doing any additional work. Last night, maybe for about 20 minutes, but it doesn't take too much time. It's starting to dry a little bit. Trying to see if I can get in the right angle. Well, nothing's standing out. I'm looking at it in person as well. It's drying a little bit more, but nothing is standing out. So it's looking pretty good. Like I said, I've got about 20 minutes, maybe 15, 20 minutes into sanding the top. I do see just a few more random scratches left behind from the palm sander. It doesn't have to be perfect, because we're essentially starting the polish process right now by wet sanding. Yeah, it's only it's 100 or 100 grit, but the whole purpose of polishing is to take big scratches, turn them into small scratches that aren't visible. And of course, I'd have to do 100, then 120, then 220, 320, 400, 500, 600, 800, 1,000, all the way up to 8,000, depending on how smooth you want. Then you don't mind if the entire surface is that high gloss look. Then doing a flood coat is the faster way to do it. I put this on the router table and gave it I think it's 1/4 inch bevel. The bottom is closer to, or I think the bottom is 1/4 inch, and the top, what was it, 5/16? It's a little bit bigger. But that'll allow the tabletop resin to flow over the side nicely and underneath. I don't think it would bother most people having a little imperfection, but they can occur, especially if you have divots or pinholes left behind by air bubbles during the cure process. If you've got that, then it's more likely to have imperfections. All right, so I think the top is looking pretty good. The bottom, I'm not worried about at all. It's not transparent. And the reason why it's white is two reasons. One reason that it's white on the bottom is when I poured each, and you can see the individual crystals and different shades of blue resin, basically. So dark blue, kind of medium and light. I think there's maybe 5 different shades I did. I tried to do a different shade every pour, and I poured this batch at least 4, maybe 5 times to get that many crystals. So you can see this is a larger one, but I think it's maybe this one here, one of these. And then I've got different size ones. Well, what I did was I poured the blue first down into the mold, and then I topped it off with white on the very top. And what I was going for was a geode look, geode crystal look, where you've got the white crystals on the, I guess this would be the bottom, so flip it over. In fact, I think I've got a couple spare ones. So here are a couple spare ones I made. I ended up not using. This one doesn't have much on the bottom. It's a little bit of, in fact, this was an experimental one. I was trying silver instead of white, but I didn't like the look of that. And this one was one I actually used in it. It's just, I had this one, I made additional ones, placed them in, and I had a few extra. I didn't want to be short, so I had a few extra. You can see this is kind of a light to medium tinted blue. And on the bottom is the white. And, I'm not a geologist or anything like that. I do appreciate, some rocks and minerals, but I don't know enough to tell you everything about it. But what I did was I went online and looked at images of crystals and geodes, and I saw that you had a milkier white crystal base that kind of bled into the more transparent color of the crystal. So that's what I mimicked. That's it. Nothing crazy. Anyways, I did that on all of them. And then because the way I poured it, you're looking at it right now because they're upside down. And that's the way I poured them, was upside down. And you can see that some have a heavier, I kind of mixed it up. And I poured a white base of resin into my mold before placing the crystals down into it to fill in the little bit of gaps in between the crystals, which also kind of tie into the white that's on each individual crystal. So long story short, this had the light out, but it's really thin. You can see on the bottom just a thin layer of white. That allows you not to be able to see through it, which kind of adds to the character of it, the design. But it'll allow, in fact, let me grab a light and I'll show you. All right, so here's kind of what will be going on with the light underneath it. Now this isn't a very bright light, but you can see that it goes through it. So there'll be, lighter, barely any blue in it, almost clear, to light medium, light dark, or medium dark, to a heavy. I've got 5 different shades here. I tried to place them around. See it a little bit better. I tried to place them around as best I could with what I have in a small space too. So kind of gives you an idea of what the finished look will be. I plan on posting 100 grit just isn't going to show you. Even with the water on, it's still looking pretty murky to me. All right, so let's go ahead and do some sanding on the side here. I'm not having to press down real hard. I really like these sponges. I can't remember what brand they are. Let me see if I can find that 1 second if you're curious. No, it doesn't say. Oh, there it is, actually. So there's different grits. This is the 100 grit. I don't know if you can see that. It's a weird name. It's TRULYWIN. It comes in a 10-pack. And they work decent. I use this sponge on 2 projects now. So you got 2 sides, and they last a while. So on this edge that's routed, like I said, I think it's 5/16. I don't think it's 3/8. I have to go look at which bit. I mix it up quite a bit. 5/16 or 3/8. It's got a pretty good curve on it. Now the router bit doesn't really chew up the epoxy. You know, high RPM, moving it at a slow speed. You have to be careful of that. I've had to fix a lot of epoxy projects over the years because the bits we're using for surfacing flat or putting a bevel on it or just routering in general, if you got a dull bit, it can lead to tear out. And that's not easily fixed on every project. On this one, because it's flood code, it wouldn't be too big of a deal because you could repair a tear out, but it's very tough to spot. So always go lighter on your repair dye when you're repairing anything on resin. So I'm just going back and forth, just doing small circles. You can see, I'm going to show you from the side here. You can see that when I'm sanding, I'm actually tilting my sand sponge all the way to the top and then back down to the bottom of the side. That ensures that you're sanding the bevel here. And I'm moving it just a little bit at a time. I'll just kind of inch it along a little bit at a time as I'm doing that. And I'm not seeing, I know it's harder for you to see just from the contrast of the video, but I've got a few random orbit spots right there, a couple more right there, but overall they're coming out nicely. It's great to be able to use water. When I'm doing wet sanding with wood, I can't because, well, you got the wood to worry about. And the reason why I like to use water for wet sanding epoxy is because it's the easiest. You know, usually I have to use an oil-based medium for wet sanding on wood. It gums up your sandpaper much easier, so you have to clean that all the time. You also have to be constantly cleaning off the project because all that builds up. But water is so thin that it just kind of drips down and it just kind of comes off the sponge. It doesn't gum up your sandpaper at all. I mean, if you did it long enough, I'm sure. But for a project like this, I don't really have to do any cleaning on the sponge or the project. So right now, I'm kind of focusing more on sanding this bevel. I'm more concerned, you kind of have to pick your battles. I'm more concerned with getting the sand marks perfect on the sides and on the top than I am the bevel. But just, you know, just slightly. I want them to all look good. Now we're not going to be sanding this forever. Don't worry. I'm probably about 5-10 minutes away from calling it good on this. Because once again, I'm just going from 80 grit random orbit to 100 grit hand sanding. It's not going to take very long to get those 80 grit random marks out. But it's also going to leave behind some pretty deep scratches all over your piece. And that tabletop epoxy may or may not blend those in. It's like, you know, think of it as like honey. And you can thin out tabletop epoxy. You can thin it out with acetone and other products, which makes it thinner, makes it closer to deep pore resins. So let's see. Let's clean off the side. I'm just using water, by the way. This is just 100% water. Let's clean the sides and see how it's looking. So at this point, I would say it's about 90% sanded. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start spot sanding it because those areas, and then take a look at the bottom. I'm not going to worry about the bottom because it's already sanded to the 80 grit random, and that's good enough. I'll put some epoxy on it after the main pour, so after today. So what I'll do is when I'm done sanding is we'll let it dry off, and it won't take long, especially in this hotter temperature. And I got fans all over the place, ceiling fans, wall fans. But it'll dry off, and then we'll mix up the resin and we'll pour it. So I do have 1, 2, 3, looks like 3 pinholes from air bubbles. And in this piece, so when I got done pouring the main pour, this thing was loaded with air bubbles because the air bubbles got stuck everywhere in the structure of the crystals, right? I didn't think about that. This is the first time I'm doing this. And they got stuck in the little crevices, and I poured it pretty slow at first to try to get all the air out. It didn't matter because it just got them stuck in there. So once the deep pour was finished, I came back and to the crystals, and I couldn't get every single one. Some of them I just couldn't even get the angle on them because they were just trapped in inverted areas. Some of those bubbles actually came loose during the cure, over the 48 hours of the primary cure of the deep pour resin. Those bubbles landed on top, and then when I surfaced it, now we have a pinhole. So hopefully those don't create, let me see if I can show you the pinholes. They're really small. You see that barely, right? That's half of an air bubble. There's 3 or 4 of them. Now surfacing it down again just to expose more. The other thing you could do is you could grind it out, air grinder. You could patch it with the resin. But honestly, because they're so small, I'm just going to pour the flood coat on. You see how they're white right now? Here's a good one, right? It's white. That is resin in the hole. I'm not going to clean it out. I'm going to leave it in there. When I pour the tabletop resin on, it will actually help fill that hole because of the resin, because of the epoxy residue that's in there. And it'll fill it in nicely. I have to think of it as a divot. The resin has to go down into it. It's an air trap when you cover it. Say this is that little tiny hole, as example. If I just covered it with this full of air, what can happen is instead of going down into the hole and filling it up and removing the air, it can just cover over it, and now you have an air bubble below your tabletop epoxy. So if you have a pinhole like that, there's a couple different things you can do. Surface it out, you could repair it, or if you're doing a flood coat like this, you can just leave that residue in there after wet sanding, and it's filled in completely. So I'm not worried about either way. I think they're going to fill in on their own. If they don't, I'll help the process, and it's filled in completely. So I'm not worried about either way. I think they're going to fill in on their own. If they don't, I'll help the process. All right, so I'm going to do some spot wet sanding here to remove some bigger marks. Here's a big group of random orbit 80 grit scratches. I'm trying to look at the screen here too. So I have to get those sanded out. Let's see here. On the larger 80 grit sanding marks from the random orbit sander. And as soon as I get those out, I'm going to lightly hit the top again. You really don't have to apply a ton of pressure. This is 100 grit, so it's pretty coarse. You just don't have to apply a ton of pressure. Normally I wouldn't have this upright sanding, but I'm doing that for your benefit. I would have it down on the table, sanding on the side so I can be a little bit more accurate, but I'm trying to accommodate for the live feed here, so hopefully you get a better sense what's going on. Right now I'm just looking for those deeper random orbit scratches left behind from the 80 grit sander. I also am going to film it for documenting to make a video later. Okay, it's looking pretty good. I'm going to hit this bevel one last time on the bottom side. If you haven't seen the bottom, that's what it looks like. It's a bunch of these crystals, and you're looking at it upside down right now. Flip it over. This is what it looks like from the top side. So these are them, and they're all shapes and sizes. Like I said, I got a dozen different shapes and sizes. All right, so let's go ahead and hit this. Just adding water as needed. Obviously, the water just wants to flow right off of this edge. So I just got to add some water here and there. Now that with this white epoxy being right on the bevel, I don't have to be as picky about sanding it because you're not going to see any scratches left. So we're just going to hit this all the way around. And then we'll clean it off and check it. Camera, but unless I get a light and really look at it, it just looks like a matte. I'm not seeing anything that's popping out to me. But since I'm here, and I like to do things right the first time, I'm just going to hit it one more time. It actually might kind of look fun this way too. Might have to try that on another project. We're going to do it this way on the LED light table so the light shines through for this one. But in future, I might be able to do something with that. Wouldn't need. The reason why I decided to do this end table, and this is an end table by the way, it could also be a wall art. It could be a serving board. It could be a bunch of different things, but I'm going to set it up as a end table. But the reason why I'm doing this one is because, you may or may not have access to exotic wood or even decent wood. This is a 100% resin project. So it just, these are right. Probably do that in the future. But a concept piece for me is I've never done this before, and I want to make it. I want to see how it turns out. It may not turn out good. Of course, everyone's going to have their different opinion on what is good and what isn't. But what I'm looking for is how do I feel about it? I take in everyone's responses as well. I'll get done making this, and I'll have a bunch of different corrections that I'd like to do for the next one. Whether to change the design or to do something different during the casting molding of it, or the colors, or just any step in the process that would make it better or easier. A lot of mistakes get made on resin projects by myself, probably others too. But you get to learn from that on these concept pieces. Make sure that there's not any debris or dirt that might scratch deeper than the 100 grit. And then we're just going to lightly sand the top. Now I already did all the hard work on the top earlier, a little bit last night. And because the top is the most important part to this piece, I just want to make sure it's perfect, or as close to. Do a little bit more sanding and then check it. Once again, I'm just using water and 100 grit wet sponge sand. I don't know what you call it. It's not really paper, but it's a sponge. Alright, let's clean it off. And I think we might be ready, unless I see something really pops out here. Let's check it. We might be ready to clean it off, let it dry. It's a nice perfect circle though. It's because I used a good mold that was already perfectly round. So I didn't actually have to cut this one with a router jig or anything. Alright, so let's take a look at it. I think it's ready. So it looks good. I'm just going to put in different light here. See if I get anything to pop out that needs to be fixed, sanded more. So I probably have about 20-25 minutes into sanding the top. Another 20 minutes into sanding the side and edges. Yeah, this looks good. Check the side again. Paper. Just lightly. Okay, that's better. Couple little spots. Now I'm looking at it in a different light. So I'm seeing plus when it's wet they hide. I mean, and that's what you want because the epoxy will basically give it a wet look and hide them. But when it dries is when they show up. Spot right there. So get some water, hit it with this 100 grit. So if you've ever wet sanded or polished, you know how much work it can be. And this is going to be one of the easier projects. But I can spend days, even weeks, wet sanding and polishing. Not because I want to, because it can take that much time. And we're just doing a flood coat on this one, so really it's like cheating. If we were going to polish this out, I would have to do a whole lot more sanding, and I'd have to really pay attention to every little imperfection. And that's a completely different process. But I thought this would be a good one. So you kind of get a sense of what it's like to wet sand epoxy that won't take us a week to do. Alright, I think we're done wet sanding. So let's clean this off. And we'll get ready for the epoxy pour. Clean this one off one last time. Starting to let it dry. I'll probably go ahead and, after it's dry, just give it one last clean, not with water, but with some paper towels, just to get off all the debris. While this is drying, I'll show you what I'm posting tomorrow. So this is what I'm going to be posting tomorrow that I made. It's a resin cube art piece. It's got a Chrysocolla rock. It's got a cactus, little flower on it. So tomorrow morning I'll post a video on how this was made, if you're curious how I made it. I'll also be the video that we do the giveaway for all the epoxy. When you stay in your home, what you love gets to stay too. From the gardens that are wild. 20 minutes or less, we'll be putting the flood coat on, and you'll really get to see what it looks like basically finished. Because after that, I'll sand the bottom, get all the drips off, put one last coat, skim coat of epoxy on the bottom, and it's done. But today, when we pour the main pour of tabletop epoxy on it, what you're seeing from the top view is the finished look. So stay tuned. It's not going to take long to get ready. In fact, I'm going to show you the mixing process and all that. So I'm just going to clean up the workspace here. All right, so we don't want to pour on stainless steel because the epoxy will stick to it. I do have these polypropylene sheets. You probably see me use these all the time. I love them. There's 100 different brands that make them. They're actually thin cutting boards, is what they are. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to set this up on some blocks so it's off the mat. Excuse me. We're just going to pour the epoxy right on top. We're going to disperse it with the heat gun. I use popsicle sticks for everything too, so we'll probably hit some stubborn areas with that. The epoxy just wants to kind of come off of this. So that's why you can't do, you know, epoxy companies say you can sand up to 220. Well, I mean, you can get it to adhere at 220, but if you sand this edge with 220 grit, the epoxy is going to flow right off of it. It might stick in some areas. So they're not wrong by saying 220. They usually say 120 or 220. But if you do 220 on the top surface, it's going to stick good. It's not going to go anywhere. But for your edges, 220 is too fine. And so 120 is good. I'm doing 100 because these are with a popsicle stick, and you're on a timer. You only get so much time after mixing up your tabletop epoxy to do that. You know, it's under an hour. I'd say about 30 minutes is a good window before the epoxy sets up too much and you can't actually repair anything. So, you know, repairing tabletop epoxy while it's still curing is not fun. It's difficult to do. This is what we're going to pour it on. I've got these blocks that we'll set it on. That should be good. So let's go ahead and set it up right now. Then I'm going to set it aside and we'll mix up the epoxy. And it'll be ready to set down. So let's see. Now I'm tucking the blocks underneath it. They're about that distance from the edge. So that way when we pour the epoxy on and it comes down the side, it's going to drip off down here. All right. So we'll mix up the epoxy on this. It's very well, doesn't stick to polypropylene. I'm actually able, you know, I use this stuff all over for different things. So right now I'm just kind of estimating how much epoxy we're going to need and getting some supplies going here. So we've got our tabletop epoxy. This product is, it doesn't say tabletop on it, but that's what it is. It's from EPE, which is Easy Pour Epoxy. They have the A and the B. By volume, it's a 1-to-1 mix. You shouldn't pour it thicker than 1/4 inch. Now, even though you can mix these up by volume, slow this down. You can mix it up by volume or you can mix it up by weight. And I'm going to mix it up by weight today. So I've got this scale right here, and you can put different size mixing buckets. I've got a bigger scale for large, 60 liter, 100 liter pours as well. But this guy gets me by for most. And we'll use a simple equation. It's the same volume, right? There's 1 gallon in each of these, and you pour it 1 to 1. If you're doing it by volume, if you've got 10 ounces of A, you do 10 ounces of B. So there's the B, and you've got a perfect 1-to-1 blend, and that's how you can do it. I don't use measuring cups very often. I use white paper cups a lot. So the A weighs a little bit more than the B, so you can't just do 100 grams of A and 100 grams of B. That won't mix right. Your ratio will be off because this weighs more than the B. So some brands offer the formula by weight, mixing by weight up on their website. Some don't. What I do in the calculator is 100 grams of, and I'm using 100 because it makes it really simple. Usually, it's like 254 or something like that, right? But for 100, so then you multiply it by 0.9, you get 90. You just add back your 100, and now you have your total. So I know I got this bag on here because, as you can imagine, I get resin over everything. So you need a B, you add back in 123, you get your total, and basically it's at 123 now, so you add in B till you get to your total amount that you calculated up, and you're done. That's it. So that's an easy way. That's an easier way to do it, I should say. Especially if you don't have any markings for your resin. All right, so let's get going here. All right, so we're going to need a couple things. We've got our tabletop epoxy. We got our A and B. I always verify. I've got lots of jugs of epoxy, so I always like to look at them, really focus, make sure I've got the same type of product, because I've got 3 different types of product from this company: deep pour, I think it's like glaze coat, and then this tabletop. Mix in a little bit of blue. This is crystal clear. I'll pour it and show you. It's crystal clear when you pour this into here. This cup kind of casts a little bit of a yellow look, but you'll see it when I pour in this clear one, that the A and the B are clear. I'm going to mix in a little bit of this blue dye. Now the reason why I've got it in here, and the reason why I'm not just going to dump it in from the dye container, is because I can control the level, saturation level of the blue by putting a little bit of epoxy into this container, mixing this up. Then I can just add a drop or 2 at a time, mix it in as I go, and I can get the precise color that I want. If I were to put drops in here directly, this dye is very potent, highly concentrated, and it can turn it a much darker blue than you want. And then what do, right? You have to pour this out, start over. So we use this container as a way to precisely add in our dye. All right, so on a flood coat, we're not going to need much. And I am going to place this epoxy into a vacuum chamber. I'm going to heat it up a little bit, and then we'll pour it onto our project. Now, when I pour it onto the project, onto this resin piece, it's not going to take much. I'm thinking it's going to be close to an 1/8 inch thick. So I'm just going to ballpark here how much epoxy I need, because I've done this a lot. But if I hadn't, I've seen all sorts of methods, everything from using rice and all that to calculate volume of spaces you need for epoxy. Because if you underestimate how much epoxy you need for your project, that can cost you your project. Because if you mix up another batch and try to mix it and pour it on your project because you were shy in volume, those 2 epoxies might not adhere to each other without imperfection. So yes, I'm going to mix up more than what I need, but this is what you can do. Because I do that on every project, you can see this is my extra epoxy bucket. And I've got, you know, several of these in different shapes and different things going on. This one gets a random. I just dump the extra epoxy into that bucket, and then I'll make a future project out of it. So there's no waste. If you're working with a lot of epoxy, that's a great way to get, you know, kind of work on multiple projects at once with no waste. If you're not, you're just doing one project and done, then just, you know, chuck it or find something, maybe pour it in some small molds. Worst case scenario, you throw it in the garbage, you're out, you know, 10, 15 bucks an extra epoxy. The price to pay to get your project done, it's worth it. It's got our epoxy, our piece is ready to pour on. Let's go ahead and start mixing up. One thing I forgot to mention is I always do the double bucket, so I'll mix it up in this. I'll mix it up really good, add in the color dye, then when I think I'm ready, I'll pour it into here, not scrape the sides of this, just pour it in, you know, pretty much all of it, and then I'll continue and I'll mix this one up even further. What that does is if there's any residual A or B epoxy on the sides or in the bottom that didn't get mixed into the full epoxy batch, they won't end up in your final cup. And the reason why that's important is because if you have unmixed A or B, the resin or hardener in this, and you pour it on your project, that's going to lead to many imperfections. And it could also lead to some areas not curing properly. So you get rid of that by mixing it up in here, pouring it into this, mixing up this really good, and then pouring that on your project. So we're going to do the double bucket method here. Some people have asked what works better. In fact, I think it was a comment on a post this morning or yesterday. They asked what works better for removing the bubbles when applying a flood coat on the surface of a resin piece or a wood piece. A heat gun or a torch, right? So I've got both. I've got the heat gun, and I've got the torch, and we'll use both. And they do different things. The heat gun's better at dispersing the epoxy evenly, and the torch works better for popping the air bubbles. So just use both of them. And we are going to start with the A. Now this is easy pour epoxy. The A, the resin. Now I think we're going to need probably around 200 grams of total epoxy. So let's pour some A in. Do 125. Sorry about the air compressor. So that's actual epoxy, how much we have, 125 grams. So now, we swap out the A for the B. Let's take our 125, multiply it by 0.9. Tells us we need 112 grams of the hardener, which is the B. So we're going to add back in the 125. We have a total of 237. So now, that will be a good 1-to-1. So 237, it doesn't have to be 100% accurate. Off by half a gram is fine. So at the risk of putting too much in there, I'm just going to leave it. Now that gives us our 1-to-1 ratio of resin and hardener. Now we can get rid of the scale and the calculator. We have 237 grams. Now I'm going to go ahead and mix this up a little bit. It's important to scrape the sides and the bottom. It's a spatula, but I cut the tip off so it's flat, right? That allows me to scrape the bottoms. And it's pretty flat on one side, so I can get in here and I can scrape the sides, I can scrape the bottoms. Now what I'm doing there is I poured in A first, right? And then I came back and poured in the B. The A is sitting on the bottom and the sides. The B was sitting on top of the A, but it was also sitting on the sides. If you don't mix those up good, and you go and pour spots that just don't seem to want to adhere to your project, and you don't know why, well, usually 9 times out of 10 it's because the resin and the hardener weren't mixed in properly. Okay, so that's, the first step is to mixing it properly. The second step is to do the bucket method, second bucket. So before we do that, and you can see that little speck of blue dye is pretty potent. That's why I don't just drop it into the container and start mixing it all together. So I'm mixing it up separate here. I just want a hint of blue to it. That protects against aging. In 10 years from now, resin that is clear, this is clear right now, you can see that, it's clear. So, now we can add in just a drop or two. I'm going to see what that looks like. So, I think you'll be surprised how much blue that little 2 drops adds in. There we go. We just have a hint of blue to it. Once again, that helps to add protection from yellowing down the road. I wish that it would never age, but it doesn't matter how much you spend on epoxy, and I know they all claim that they won't yellow, but guess what? They all do. Your cheapest ones yellow faster. More expensive ones yellow much slower over time, decades. I've got pieces that I've done that are basically clear, that are 10 years old, that still look clear. And that's because they're done with the good epoxy. Let me bring this over here. We're ready to do a couple things. One, I'm just spot checking the color, make sure that's the color I want it to be. Now I'm on a clock, I don't have much time. The cup is a little yellow, right? So this looks more green than it is. It's actually really clear. You'll see that when I pour it on. It's with just a little bit of blue tint dye in it. All right? So I'm on a clock. I don't have much time. We're done with the dye. We've mixed up the epoxy. Now I'm going to grab the heat gun. It's at 76 degrees ambient temperature. That's looking good. We're going to heat it up just a little bit though. Now the heat right away will pop these bubbles on the top surface. Watch this. Okay, those are popped, but there's still a lot of bubbles in the resin. So I'm just gonna, it's about on half heat right now. Still really hot. I'm gonna mix it up a little bit. And yeah, I've gotten good at this over the years. I'm just, by myself. All right. Mix it up some more. Now, I'll check the temperature of it, but I can go off a feel. I know what this epoxy feels like at 76 degrees, or ambient temperature. I can feel it, and the viscosity is lowering, so it's getting thinner as I'm heating it up. I don't want to heat it up too much because then it'll overheat. I do need to heat it up enough. Okay, so we're almost there. I don't want to heat it up any more than that. Now, we're going to pour it into our second container. I'll show you the temperature of it in a second. I honestly don't know. I'm guessing probably around 90 degrees. I go off of the feel of it. So we'll clean it off. Put that back in there, throw this one away. Let's go ahead and mix this up a little bit more. First, I'm going to pop some bubbles. You gotta be careful, you don't want to overheat. Just getting kind of the big group of them on the top. That might fall over. Okay, now in a clean bucket with a clean spatula or mixing tool, we're going to mix it up some more. Okay. It's at a good temperature. All right, I'm going to take this over to the vacuum chamber. So let's see if I can get the camera to follow here. All right. I got a lot of bubbles right on the top surface. Let's pop those. Now I'm racing against the clock. I'm running out of time. We're going to need the torch again. Let's go ahead and put this in the chamber. Seal it off. Open up the vacuum line. Yep, sealed. So you can see the negative pressure, the vacuum. I have to constantly come back and check it because if I got too much resin in that bucket and the bubbles don't pop right away, it'll overfill and spill. So you can kind of see, I know the angle's not the best, but you can kind of see it down there. Right now the bubbles are expanding and rising to the surface where they pop. Some of them don't pop though, so I'll keep an eye on it. Okay, it's getting close to the top, but the bubbles are starting to pop. So check back on it. Alright, it's really close to the top right now. And there, it's starting to bubble, or boil. Okay. So it made it close to the top, and then it started to rapidly pop its bubbles, and it's now lowering back down. So it was close, but I knew that, roughly 220, 230 grams probably wouldn't overflow, just based on what I've done in the past. So we're going to let that go for another minute or two. Get all those bubbles up to the top surface so they can pop. Okay, I think we're good. Shut off the vacuum. I'm going to slowly let some pressure into the chamber. If you go too fast, it creates a mess. It's air pressure being sucked in through the intake, jetted downward, right, towards the epoxy. So we're just going to crack it. Okay, so let's take a look at it. Now the temperature is going to be a lot hotter, but the bubbles are out. So I got a few sitting on top. Okay, I got my other camera set up. We are recording. Let's go ahead and pour the epoxy on. All right. Trying to pour it somewhat evenly. It's pretty thick on top right now, so okay. So at this point, And what I'm doing right now is I'm just getting the sides really well. There's no need to just waste a bunch of epoxy at this point by dripping it all down the sides. I mean, it's just going to end up on the ground. So what I'm doing here is I'm putting it on manually, or I guess I should say I'm applying it with this popsicle stick, right? And coating the surface. And it's kind of just like painting the surface here. I just want to make sure it's coated. I will come back and add more here in a minute by pouring it on there. First, I'll make sure the whole surface is coated. See how that looks. It's really hard to see the epoxy. I mean, it's so clear. Even for me, it's difficult to see. So I'll have to look at it from a few different angles. I'm just spreading it on, right? Now the top is nice and coated. 100 degrees, like a couple minutes ago, just before we poured it on. It's going to be now closer to 75, 80 degrees. Okay. Obviously, you're going to have some wasted resin. I can just pick it up there on the bottom into it. I mean, there's going to be a little bit. Okay. Now I'm just double checking. So good. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back around the edge. I'm not worried about the center. And this is going to flow down the edge. Now at this point, we are looking really good on the edges, all right? And the top. Now we have a pretty even surface, so I'm not going to do much of this. Just a little bit. I'm going to get the edges. But it's basically done. We'll get the sides. I'm not doing much. Bring this over more in view. Okay. There you go. Okay. We're looking really good. I don't see any bubbles on the top surface. There might be some on the sides. Just going to hit it with the heat gun first. That will get out 90% the bubbles. I got one small little imperfections. I think that's it. I'm trying to look at it from different angles. You don't want to mess with it too much. We are just about done. I don't see anything sticking out to me. One last little spot. Okay. So I'm going to show you really quick, and then we're going to be done with this one. I need to cover it before dust starts getting on it. Let's get in for a close-up. Here's what we're looking at. So not a whole lot of wasted epoxy, a little bit down there. Man, that turns out really crystal clear, doesn't it? So if you're just joining, this is a flood coat epoxy on a deep pour resin project, sanded to 100 grit, and you don't see any sanding marks, do you? That's the perfect grit for something like this. I'm using Easy Pour Epoxy Tabletop. Going to Easy Pour Epoxy's website, just enter in untreated art. All one word, you get 10% off. Okay, this is where I'm going to leave you. So thanks for joining. This pour went good, and I'll show you the final video and pictures in a few weeks. Thank you. Bye.